April 16th, 1945. 0727 hours. Radar Picket Station Number 1, 30 miles northwest of Okinawa. Quartermaster 2nd Class Aristides Footride set down his pencil in the logbook as the USS Laffey's radar operator reported a single contact approaching from the north. Range 12 miles. Speed 180 knots. Altitude 4,000 feet. The 19-year-old son of a Greek Orthodox pastor from Seattle reached for the sound-powered telephone. General quarters would sound in moments. What Footrides didn't know was that this single blip on the radar screen would trigger the most devastating kamikaze assault ever directed against a single American warship. In the next 80 minutes, the destroyer USS Laffey would face 22 Japanese aircraft in an attack so intense that naval historians would still struggle to explain how she survived. The Imperial Japanese Navy's Operation Kikusui, floating chrysanthemums, had mobilized over 3,000 aircraft for mass suicide attacks against the American fleet off Okinawa. Named after the emblem of the 14th century samurai Kusunoki Masashige, who chose death over surrender, these operations represented Japan's final desperate attempt to stop the American advance toward the home islands. 7 major Kikusui operations had already been launched. Hundreds of American ships had been damaged. Dozens had been sunk. But no ship had faced what the Laffey was about to endure. The USS Laffey cut through Pacific swells at 25 knots. Her Allen M. Sumner-class hull displacing 2,200 tons of seawater. Commander Frederick Julian Becton stood on the bridge studying the tactical plot. His ship carried 336 men and an arsenal specifically designed for anti-aircraft warfare. 6 5-inch dual-purpose guns in 3 twin mounts, 12 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft cannons, 11 20mm Oerlikon cannons. The mathematics of survival were brutal. Traditional single-aircraft attacks achieved kill rates of less than 2% against properly defended destroyers. Mass kamikaze attacks had raised that percentage to 18.6%. But what was approaching Laffey would defy all statistical models. Becton was no stranger to kamikaze attacks. As executive officer of the destroyer Aaron Ward, he had witnessed the first USS Laffey's destruction at Guadalcanal in November 1942, when she engaged the Japanese battleship Hiei at a range of 20 feet before being torn apart by 14-inch shells. 5 months later, as Aaron Ward's commander, Becton watched his own ship sink under Japanese dive bombers. The Navy's decision to give him command of the second destroyer named Laffey seemed either ironic or prophetic. Under his relentless training regimen, the crew had achieved gunnery scores that ranked among the highest in the Pacific Fleet. They would need every fraction of that proficiency. Aboard the approaching Aichi D-3A Val dive bomber, the pilot checked his fuel gauge and bomb release mechanism. The 750-kilogram bomb beneath his fuselage was armed. His mission was reconnaissance, to probe American defenses and report back on ship positions. But the pilot had other intentions. Like thousands of Special Attack Corps volunteers, he had written his final letters home, drunk his ceremonial sake, and tied his Hachimaki headband bearing the rising sun. There would be no return flight to report intelligence. This would be a one-way mission. The American radar operators tracked the Val as it circled at 8,000 yards, just beyond effective gun range. In the Combat Information Center below the bridge, Lieutenant Lloyd Hull monitored the ship's sophisticated SK air search and SG surface search radar systems. The electronic eyes could detect aircraft at 60 miles and surface contacts at 22 miles. But technology had limitations. Low-flying aircraft could slip under the radar's coverage. Multiple simultaneous attacks could overwhelm operators' ability to track individual targets. And the newest Japanese tactic, using high-altitude decoys to draw away fighter cover while low-level attackers struck, had proven devastatingly effective. At 0730, the Val began its approach run. 5-inch Mount 51 swung to track the target. The gun captain, gunner's mate Lawrence Delowski, had drilled his crew until they could load, aim, and fire in under 3 seconds. The mount's radar-directed Mark 37 fire control system calculated range, speed, bearing, and altitude, adjusting for wind, ship movement, and barrel wear. The mechanical computer, a marvel of analog engineering, solved ballistic equations that would have taken human gunners minutes to calculate. But at this range, even with radar direction, hitting a maneuvering aircraft travelling at over 200 miles per hour required as much luck as skill. At 0744, the Val turned away without attacking. A probe, a test. Or perhaps the pilot had lost his nerve. But radar screens were already showing new contacts. Many contacts. The main attack force was approaching. Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, commander of the 5th Air Fleet on Kyushu, had authorized the launch of over 350 aircraft for Kikusui No. 3. Pilots had been briefed on priority targets. Radar picket destroyers that provided early warning for the main fleet. Destroy the pickets, and the carriers would be vulnerable. The tactical importance of Radar Picket Station No. 1 made Laffey the primary target. At 0827, Laffey's radar detected multiple groups of aircraft approaching from the north and northwest. Estimated 50-plus contacts. Commander Becton immediately requested fighter support from the Combat Air Patrol. 4 F-6F Hellcats and 2 F-4U Corsairs were vectored toward the incoming raid, but they were 12 miles away and would need precious minutes to intercept. The two-plane Cap assigned directly to Laffey had lost radio contact and was nowhere to be seen. The destroyer would face the initial assault alone. The first wave consisted of 4 Aichi D-3A Vals approaching in a coordinated attack pattern designed to overwhelm the ship's defences. 2 would attack from the bow, forcing the ship to turn and expose her beam to the other 2 attacking from the stern. It was a tactic perfected through 3 years of Pacific combat, refined through the sacrifice of hundreds of pilots who had learned what worked and what didn't. Their knowledge, transmitted back to training bases before their final missions, created a constantly evolving doctrine of suicide attack tactics. At 0830, the 4 Vals split into pairs and began their attack runs. Becton ordered full speed and hard left rudder. The ship heeled sharply, her hull groaning under the stress of the emergency turn. The manoeuvre would bring more guns to bear on the attackers while presenting a narrower target profile. But it also meant the ship would be committed to a predictable course for crucial seconds. Mount 51 and 52, the forward 5-inch turrets, opened fire first. The distinctive crack of the 5-inch 38 caliber guns echoed across the water. Each shell contained a time delay fuse that would detonate the projectile at a predetermined range, creating a cloud of shrapnel designed to shred aircraft aluminum and kill pilots. The key was calculating the correct fuse timing. Too early and the shrapnel cloud would dissipate before reaching the target. Too late and the shell would pass harmlessly by. Fire Controlman, 2nd Class. Glenn Radder watched through his rangefinder as the first Val bore in from the starboard bow. At 2,000 yards, the 40mm guns joined the barrage. The Swedish-designed Bofors fired 2-pound explosive shells at a rate of 120 rounds per minute. The distinctive pom-pom-pom sound of the 40mm mixed with the boom of the 5-inch guns created a deafening cacophony that required gun crews to communicate through hand signals. At 1,000 yards, the 20mm Oerlikons opened fire. These Swiss-designed cannons could fire 450 rounds per minute, creating a virtual wall of lead and tracers. Gunner's mate 3rd Class Warren Walker, strapped into his 20mm mount, watched his tracers arc toward the incoming Val. The aircraft seemed to hang in the air, growing larger with terrifying slowness, despite its actual speed of over 200 miles per hour. Walker could see the pilot's face, the rising sun emblems on the wings, the bomb slung beneath the fuselage. The first Val shuddered under multiple 40mm hits. Pieces of aluminum skin and engine cowling flew off. The port wing separated at the root. The aircraft cartwheeled into the ocean 400 yards off the starboard beam, its bomb detonating on impact with the water and sending a geyser of spray over Laffey's forward guns. 1 down. The second Val, pressing its attack from the port bow, flew into a concentrated barrage from Mount 52. A 5-inch shell detonated directly beneath the aircraft, the shrapnel shredding the fuselage and killing the pilot instantly. The Val nosed over and crashed 300 yards to port. 2 down. The third Val, attacking from astern, released its bomb at 500 yards before multiple 20mm hits set it ablaze. The bomb splashed harmlessly 50 yards astern as the burning aircraft crashed into Laffey's wake. 3 down. The fourth Val made the mistake of approaching at a constant angle and altitude, making fire control calculations simple. Mount 53, the aft 5-inch turret under Chief Gunner's mate Wayne Schaffer, put 3 shells into the aircraft at 800 yards. The Val disintegrated in mid-air, raining debris across the ocean surface. 4 aircraft destroyed in 3 minutes. In the Combat Information Center, Lieutenant Hull marked the 4 kills on his plotting board, but the radar scope showed no respite. More aircraft were approaching, and the tactical situation was deteriorating. The 8-plane cap that had been providing high cover had been decoyed away by a group of Japanese fighters, leaving Laffey exposed. The 2-plane low cap was still out of radio contact. For the next critical minutes, the destroyer would have to depend entirely on her own guns. At 0839, the main body of the attack force arrived. Unlike the first wave's coordinated assault, these aircraft attacked in rapid succession from multiple directions, making it impossible for the ship's fire control systems to engage all targets effectively. The tactic, developed through careful analysis of American anti-aircraft procedures, was designed to overwhelm human decision-making capacity. Gun directors could only track one target at a time. Manual gun mounts required precious seconds to traverse to new targets. Ammunition handlers could only maintain maximum rate of fire for limited periods before exhaustion set in. The fifth attacker, a Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber, approached from dead ahead at wave-top height, below the depression limits of the 5-inch guns. Becton ordered emergency flank speed and hard right rudder, trying to unmask his aft batteries. The 20mm gunners forward fired desperately at the incoming aircraft, their tracers creating a lethal web of fire. The Judy pilot held his course, boring straight in despite taking multiple hits. At 100 yards, the pilot pulled up sharply, attempting to crash into the bridge. Quartermaster Futrides watched from the bridge wing as the Judy's propeller seemed to fill his entire field of vision. At the last second, the aircraft stalled. Whether from battle damage or pilot error would never be known. The Judy's wing clipped the port yard arm, spinning the aircraft around. It crashed into the water just 20 yards to port, its explosion showering the bridge with burning fuel and debris. Futrides felt the heat wash over him as he pressed himself against the bulkhead. Before the crew could recover, the sixth attacker was upon them. Another Judy, approaching from the starboard quarter at an angle that masked it from most of the ship's guns. Only Mount 53 and the aft 40mm could bear. The aircraft released its bomb at 300 yards. Becton ordered hard left rudder, but the bomb struck anyway, penetrating the main deck between the stacks and exploding in the after-crew's quarters. The blast killed 2 men instantly and started fires that threatened the 40mm ammunition stored nearby. The 7th aircraft, a Val approaching from port, flew into a wall of fire from the port side 20mm. Seaman First Class Robert Carr, manning gun 23, held his trigger down despite his gun beginning to overheat. The sustained fire paid off. The Val's engine erupted in flames and the aircraft crashed close aboard to port. So close that burning gasoline splashed across Laffey's deck, starting new fires. The 8th attacker achieved complete surprise. A Nakajima B-5N Kate torpedo bomber, though carrying bombs rather than torpedoes, approached from astern hidden in the smoke from the previous attacks. The aircraft was almost on top of the ship before anyone spotted it. Gunner's mate Calvin Clower, manning a 40mm mount, swung his gun around desperately, but couldn't traverse fast enough. The Kate crashed into Mount 53, the aft 5-inch turret, at 0842. The impact was catastrophic. The Kate's 250-kilogram bomb detonated on contact, blowing the top off the turret and killing everyone inside, including Chief Schaffer and his entire gun crew. Burning aviation fuel poured through the shattered turret into the handling rooms below. The ready ammunition began cooking off, sending 5-inch shells rocketing randomly across the fantail. One shell punched through the deck and exploded in the steering gear room, jamming the rudder 26 degrees to port. Laffey began circling helplessly, locked in a left turn at 25 knots. Becton immediately ordered the engines stopped, but momentum carried the ship through another complete circle before she slowed. The loss of steering couldn't have come at a worse time. 3 more aircraft were already beginning their attack runs. The 9th attacker, a Val, approached from the starboard beam. With the ship circling and Mount 53 destroyed, defensive fire was significantly reduced. The Val bore in, taking hits from the 40mm but maintaining its attack run. At the last second, defensive fire from the starboard 20mm cut the aircraft's control cables. The Val rolled inverted and crashed into the ocean just yards from the ship, its bomb detonating underwater and lifting Laffey's stern out of the water. The 10th aircraft almost ended Laffey's fight. Another Judy, approaching from astern where the destroyed Mount 53 could no longer provide defensive fire. With the rudder jammed and the ship still making slow circles, Becton couldn't maneuver to unmask his remaining guns. The Judy released its bomb from 200 yards. The weapon struck the fantail, blowing an 8 by 10-foot hole in the deck and killing 6 men manning the after 20mm guns. Among the dead was signalman Bill Kelly, who had been attempting to rig an emergency steering system. It was 0845. In 13 minutes, Laffey had been hit by 2 bombs and 1 kamikaze. 6 more aircraft had been shot down just short of the ship, but the attack was far from over. Radar showed more aircraft approaching, and the ship's defensive capabilities were seriously degraded. Mount 53 was destroyed. The rudder was jammed. Fires burned in 3 locations. Ammunition was running low on several mounts. And casualties were mounting, already 15 dead and 26 wounded. The 11th attacker marked a turning point in the battle. A Val approached from the port bow, but this time Laffey wasn't alone. 4 Marine F-4U Corsairs from Marine Fighter Squadron 5MF 441, launched from Yontan Airfield on Okinawa, arrived just as the Val began its attack run. Captain Robert Klingman's Corsair caught the Val at 500 feet, his 650 caliber machine guns shredding the Japanese aircraft's tail section. The Val spiraled into the ocean. It was the first aircraft Laffey hadn't had to destroy herself, but the Marine fighters couldn't be everywhere. The 12th attacker, a Judy approaching from the starboard quarter, slipped through while the Corsairs were engaged elsewhere. This kamikaze wouldn't miss. At 0847, the Judy crashed into the after-deck house between the stacks, its bomb penetrating the deck and exploding in the after engine room. The blast ruptured steam lines, filling the compartment with superheated vapour at 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Machinist's mate George Logan and 3 other men were literally cooked alive. The explosion also knocked out the afterfire room, reducing the ship's speed to 12 knots. Chief Machinist's mate George Weiss, in the forward engine room, felt the ship shudder from the impact. He knew from the sudden loss of steam pressure that the after engine room was gone. Working in temperatures exceeding 130 degrees, Weissy and his men struggled to maintain steam pressure to the forward engines. Without speed, Laffey would be a sitting duck. They had to keep the plant running no matter what. The 13th attacker appeared from nowhere, a twin-engine Yokosuka P-1Y Francis bomber approaching at high speed from dead astern. With Mount 53 destroyed and most of the aft 20mm knocked out, Laffey had almost no defence against attacks from that quarter. The Francis bored in, its pilot intending to crash into the bridge. At 200 yards, a Marine corsair piloted by Lieutenant Richard Kerstetter dove from above, firing a long burst into the Francis' starboard engine. The bomber yawed violently to the right, missing Laffey's stern by less than 10 feet before crashing into the ocean. The 14th aircraft nearly succeeded where others had failed. An Oscar fighter approaching from the port beam at maximum speed. The aircraft was moving so fast that gun directors couldn't track it effectively. Mount 51 managed to get off 3 rounds, but they all missed. The Oscar's pilot aimed for the bridge, clearly trying to decapitate the ship's command structure. At the last second, gunner's mate second class Robert Fenwick, manning a portside 40mm mount, achieved a lucky hit on the Oscar's tail. The aircraft yawed left, its wing clipping the ship's mast and shearing off the port yard arm, along with the American flag. The Oscar crashed close aboard to port. At 0848, there was a brief respite. No aircraft were visible, though radar showed more approaching from the north. Becton used the momentary break to assess damage. The reports were grim. Mount 53 destroyed with all hands, steering control lost, after engine room flooded, multiple fires burning, 32 dead and counting, over 50 wounded, ammunition running low on several mounts, and still more aircraft approaching. Lieutenant Frank Manson, the ship's communications officer, asked Becton if they should prepare to abandon ship. Becton's response would become legendary. "Hell no, Frank. We still have guns that can shoot. I'll never abandon ship as long as a gun will fire." Nearby, a lookout muttered under his breath, adding his own postscript to the captain's words. "And if I can find one man to fire it." The 15th attacker ended the brief respite. Another Val, approaching from high altitude directly out of the sun, the classic attack angle, used since the beginning of aerial warfare. The sun's glare made it impossible for lookouts to spot the aircraft until it was already in its dive. The Val released its bomb from 1,000 feet. Becton ordered hard right rudder, forgetting momentarily that steering control was lost. The bomb struck the water 10 yards to port, the explosion sending shrapnel through the ship's hull and wounding 4 more men. The 16th aircraft was a Mitsubishi G-4M Betty bomber, far larger than the single-engine attackers Laffey had faced so far. The twin-engine bomber approached from the starboard beam at 200 feet, too low for the 5-inch guns to engage. Every 40 and 20mm gun that could bear opened fire. The Betty's size made it an easier target, but it could also absorb more damage. Tracers poured into the bomber's fuselage and wings. One engine burst into flames, then the other. Still the Betty came on. At 300 yards, the Betty's pilot released 2 bombs. Both missed, straddling the ship, but the bomber itself, now fully engulfed in flames, continued straight at Laffey. At the last second, the aircraft's left wing dipped. Whether from control failure or the pilot's death would never be known. The Betty passed directly over Mount 52, so close that the 5-inch gun crew ducked. The bomber crashed into the ocean on the port side, its burning wreckage skipping across the water like a flaming stone. The 17th attacker achieved what others hadn't, a direct hit on one of Laffey's main gun mounts. An Oscar fighter, approaching from ahead at high speed, released a bomb that struck Mount 52 squarely. The explosion didn't penetrate the turret's armour, but the concussion killed 3 men inside and wounded 5 others, including the mount captain. The turret was out of action, reducing Laffey's forward firepower by half. By 0850, Laffey was in desperate condition. Only Mount 51 remained fully operational of the 3 5-inch mounts. Half the 40mm guns were destroyed or damaged. Most of the 20mm were out of action. Fires burned out of control aft. The ship was making only 8 knots, circling helplessly with her jammed rudder, and radar showed more aircraft approaching. The 18th attacker should have finished Laffey. A Val approaching from the perfect angle, dead astern where the ship had no remaining defences. but as the Val lined up for its attack run, two Marine corsairs dove from above. Captain Floyd Kirkpatrick and Lieutenant Robert Cowden caught the Val in a crossfire, their combined .24-50 caliber machine guns literally disintegrating the Japanese aircraft. The kill was so close to Laffey that debris from the Val landed on the destroyer's deck. The 19th aircraft was another Judy, approaching from the port quarter. By now, Laffey's gun crews were exhausted. They had been firing continuously for over 20 minutes. Gun barrels were overheating. Ammunition was running dangerously low. Several guns had jammed from the sustained rate of fire. The Judy bore in, taking hits but maintaining its attack run. At 100 yards, the pilot pulled up, trying to crash into the bridge from above. A lucky burst from gun mount 44 caught the Judy's wing root. The aircraft rolled right and crashed into the ocean just yards from the ship. At 0851, the 20th attacker arrived, another Val approaching from starboard. This pilot had learned from watching his comrades die. He approached at varying altitudes and angles, jinking constantly to throw off the gunner's aim. The few operational guns that could bear fired desperately, but their accuracy was suffering from exhaustion and battle damage. The Val released its bomb from 300 yards. The weapon struck the water close aboard, the explosion sending more shrapnel into Laffey's already perforated hull. The 21st aircraft nearly accomplished what 20 others had failed to do. Another Judy, hidden in the smoke from Laffey's fires, approached from astern completely undetected. The first warning was the roar of its engine as it passed over the fantail at 50 feet. The Judy released its bomb at point-blank range. The weapon struck the deck just forward of the destroyed Mount 53, penetrating into the after-ammunition handling room before exploding. The blast was catastrophic. 5-inch ammunition began detonating in chain reaction. The after part of the ship erupted in flame and smoke. Shrapnel scythed through the damage control parties trying to fight the fires. Among the dead was Ensign Robert Thompson, who had left his station in the Combat Information Center to lead a repair party. He would receive a posthumous Navy Cross for his sacrifice. The explosion also ruptured the fire mains, cutting water pressure to the after part of the ship. Without water to fight the fires, damage control parties resorted to throwing burning debris overboard by hand. Men wrapped rags around their hands and grabbed red-hot shell casings, hurling them over the side. Others used their bodies to smother flames, rolling on the deck to extinguish burning clothing. The 22nd and final attacker was a Val, approaching from the port bow at 0853. By this time, Laffey was barely fighting back. Only Mount 51 and a handful of automatic weapons remained in action. The ship was dead in the water, burning furiously aft, listing to port from flooding. Commander Becton watched the Val approach, knowing his ship had little left to stop it. But Laffey wasn't alone. 4 Navy F-6F. Hellcats from Fighter Squadron 10, finally arriving from the carrier Intrepid, caught the Val at 1,000 yards. Lieutenant John Mitchell's Hellcat pumped hundreds of rounds into the Val's engine. The aircraft burst into flames and crashed into the ocean 500 yards from Laffey. The attack was over. In 80 minutes, USS Laffey had faced 22 aircraft in the most concentrated kamikaze attack of the Pacific War. 6 kamikazes had crashed into the ship. 4 bombs had scored direct hits. The destroyer had been strafed repeatedly. Yet somehow, impossibly, she remained afloat. 32 men were dead. 71 wounded. The ship was a burning, flooding wreck. But she had survived. The mathematics were staggering. Of the 22 attackers, Laffey's guns had shot down 8. Marine and Navy fighters had destroyed another 8. 6 had crashed into the ship or scored bomb hits. Never before or after would a single ship face such concentrated kamikaze attacks and survive. Statistical models suggested the probability of survival was less than 1%. Yet Laffey had beaten those odds through a combination of superior training, innovative tactics, raw courage, and perhaps a measure of luck. Executive Officer Lieutenant Commander Charles Holovac would later analyse the attack with mathematical precision. The average interval between aircraft attacks was 3 minutes and 38 seconds. The longest gap was 8 minutes. The shortest was 45 seconds. At the peak of the assault, Laffey was engaging a new attacker every 90 seconds for nearly 15 minutes straight. No ship in naval history had sustained such intensive attacks and survived. The technological factors were equally significant. Laffey's Mark 37 gun directors, with their sophisticated analog computers, had enabled the 5-inch guns to engage targets with unprecedented accuracy. The proximity-fused shells, a secret weapon that detonated automatically when near an aircraft, had dramatically increased hit probability. The Beaufort's 40mm guns, with their high rate of fire and explosive shells, had provided crucial middle-layer defense. Even the humble 20mm Oerlikons, though often criticized as inadequate, had shot down several attackers at close range. But technology alone didn't save Laffey. The human factor was decisive. Commander Becton's tactical brilliance in maneuvering his damaged ship. The gun crews who continued firing even as their shipmates died around them. The damage control parties who fought fires with their bare hands. The engineers who kept the plant running in hellish conditions. The radar operators who tracked multiple targets through smoke and confusion. Every man who stayed at his post when every instinct screamed to seek cover. The Japanese had committed their best pilots and aircraft to the attack. These weren't the inexperienced Toko volunteers of late 1945, given a few hours of flight training before their final mission. These were skilled aviators who had chosen death over defeat. Their tactical coordination, particularly in the early stages of the attack, showed sophisticated understanding of American defensive capabilities. The use of smoke and sun glare for concealment, the multi-axis attacks to overwhelm fire control, the targeting of command and control structures. These tactics would be studied and incorporated into post-war naval aviation doctrine. The immediate tactical impact was significant. The loss of Laffey from Radar Picket Station No. 1 created a gap in the early warning network protecting the invasion fleet. But her survival sent a more important message. If a single destroyer could survive 22 kamikaze attacks, then the Japanese strategy of trading lives for ships was failing. The mathematics of attrition that had seemed to favor Japan, thousands of aircraft versus hundreds of ships, was being negated by American defensive capabilities and damage control expertise. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, commander of amphibious forces at Okinawa, would later state that Laffey's survival was the single most important factor in maintaining fleet morale during the height of the kamikaze offensive. If she could survive such an attack, any ship could. The psychological impact on American sailors, who had begun to dread radar picket duty as a death sentence, was immeasurable. The Japanese reaction was equally telling. Radio intercepts revealed that the failure to sink Laffey despite the unprecedented concentration of attackers caused serious morale problems among Special Attack Corps pilots. If 22 aircraft couldn't sink a single destroyer, how many would it take to sink a battleship or carrier? The mathematical equation that justified kamikaze tactics, one pilot and plane for one enemy ship, was proven false. Vice Admiral Ugaki, reviewing the after-action reports, realized the implications. His diary entry for April 16th noted, "Despite the brave sacrifice of our special attack warriors, the enemy destroyer survived. This shows the limitations of body crash tactics against well-defended targets. We must reconsider our approach." Within weeks, Japanese tactics shifted toward attacking transports and supply ships, rather than heavily armed warships, a tacit admission that the kamikaze strategy had reached its limits. The technological lessons were immediately incorporated into American naval construction. The Allen M. Sumner-class destroyers like Laffey, with their twin 5-inch mounts and heavy anti-aircraft batteries, became the template for post-war destroyer design. The effectiveness of proximity-fused ammunition was definitively proven. The importance of redundant damage control systems was validated. Every major navy in the world studied Laffey's action report, incorporating its lessons into their own doctrines. But perhaps the most important lesson was human. In an age of increasing technological sophistication, when mechanical computers and radar systems were revolutionizing warfare, the survival of USS Laffey proved that the human element remained decisive. Training, leadership, courage, and determination could overcome seemingly impossible odds. The same qualities that had enabled wooden ships to defeat iron ones, that had allowed David to defeat Goliath, still mattered in the age of radar and guided weapons. The repair statistics told their own story. Laffey required 4 months in dry dock to repair the battle damage. Over 300 tons of damaged steel were cut away and replaced. The entire after section of the ship was essentially rebuilt. The cost exceeded $3 million, more than a third of the ship's original construction cost. But the Navy considered it money well spent. Laffey had proven that American ships could take unprecedented punishment and survive. The human cost was sobering, but not devastating. 32 dead from a crew of 336, less than 10% killed despite the ship being hit by 6 kamikazes and 4 bombs. This survival rate was attributed to several factors: Becton's emphasis on damage control training, the crew's experience from previous combat operations, the design of the Allen M. Sumner-class, with better armour and compartmentalization than earlier destroyers, and perhaps most importantly, the extraordinary performance of the ship's medical team under Dr. Matthew Darnell, who continued operating on wounded even as bombs exploded around him. Individual acts of heroism were too numerous to fully catalogue. Gunner's mate Lawrence Delowski, who remained at his post in Mount 51 despite shrapnel wounds, personally accounting for 3 of the 8 aircraft shot down. Machinist's mate George Wise, who kept the forward engines running despite temperatures that literally blistered paint off bulkheads. Quartermaster Ari Futrides, who maintained the ship's log throughout the battle, providing the detailed record that would allow historians to reconstruct events. Seaman Calvin Clower, who manned a 40mm gun after its entire crew was killed, shooting down one attacker before being wounded himself. The story of Lieutenant T.W. Runk deserved special mention. As damage control officer, Runk had perhaps the most dangerous job during the attack. Moving through the ship to assess damage, he discovered an unexploded bomb on deck, a 250-kilogram weapon that had failed to detonate. Without hesitation, Runk picked up the bomb and threw it overboard. The weapon exploded seconds after hitting the water, close enough that shrapnel peppered the ship's hull. Had it detonated on deck, the damage might have been fatal. The supporting ships at Radar Picket Station No. 1 also played crucial roles. LCS-L 51, commanded by Lieutenant Howell Chickering, was credited with shooting down 6 aircraft and would receive a Presidential Unit citation. Her gunfire support during the height of the attack, when Laffey's own guns were being knocked out, was instrumental in the destroyer's survival. LCSL 116 rescued 22 Laffey sailors who had been blown overboard, many severely burned. Without their swift action, the death toll would have been significantly higher. The fighter pilots who eventually arrived also deserved recognition. Marine Captain Floyd Kirkpatrick was credited with 3 kills. Navy Lieutenant John Mitchell got 2. Their arrival at the critical moment when Laffey's defences were nearly exhausted probably saved the ship. The failure of the original cap to provide coverage, they had been decoyed away by Japanese fighters, would lead to significant changes in fighter direction doctrine. Never again would radar picket destroyers be left without continuous fighter cover. The broader implications for the Pacific War were profound. Operation Kikusui had committed over 300 aircraft to attacks on April 16th. The loss of 22 aircraft to achieve only moderate damage to a single destroyer was an unacceptable exchange rate. Japan had approximately 3,000 operational aircraft remaining. At this rate of exchange, they would be exhausted long before inflicting decisive damage on the invasion fleet. The mathematical equation was inexorable. The American response was swift and decisive. Admiral Chester Nimitz, reviewing Laffey's action report, ordered immediate changes to radar picket procedures. Destroyers would no longer operate singly, but in mutually supporting groups. Fighter coverage would be continuous and multi-layered. Emergency repair ships would be stationed closer to picket stations. These changes, implemented within days, dramatically reduced losses during subsequent Kikusui operations. The Japanese also drew lessons, though they were largely negative. The concentration of attacks on a single ship had failed to achieve decisive results, while sacrificing irreplaceable pilots and aircraft. Future operations would employ more dispersed tactics, attacking multiple targets simultaneously to prevent concentration of defensive fire. But this dispersal also reduced the probability of achieving decisive damage to any single target. It was a tactical paradox with no good solution. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, would later admit that the failure to sink Laffey marked a turning point in Japanese naval strategy. The kamikaze had been Japan's last hope to inflict enough damage to make the Americans reconsider invasion. If maximum effort couldn't sink a single destroyer, there was no hope of stopping the vast invasion fleet assembled for Operation Downfall. The atomic bombs that ended the war 4 months later merely punctuated a conclusion that was already evident. The long-term impact on naval warfare doctrine was revolutionary. The action definitively proved that surface ships could survive mass air attacks if properly equipped and trained. This would influence Cold War naval construction, with ships designed around layered air defense systems. The Aegis combat system, with its ability to track and engage multiple targets simultaneously, was a direct descendant of the lessons learned off Okinawa. Every modern warship's emphasis on point defense weapons and damage control can trace its lineage back to Laffey's desperate fight. The human legacy was equally enduring. Laffey's crew formed one of the most active veteran associations in naval history, holding reunions for over 60 years. Their motto, "We who survived," spoke not just to their physical survival, but to the psychological burden of being among the few to face such an attack and live. Many crew members suffered what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, though the term didn't exist in 1945. The Navy's modern understanding of combat stress and its treatment owes much to studying survivors like Laffey's crew. Commander Becton would go on to become a rear admiral, his tactical innovations during the kamikaze attack studied at naval war colleges worldwide. His memoir, The Ship That Would Not Die, became required reading at Annapolis, but Becton always insisted that credit belonged to his crew. In a 1975 interview he stated, "I gave the orders, but those boys carried them out. They're the ones who saved the ship. Any commander would have been proud to lead such men." The ship herself would serve for another 30 years, participating in the Korean War and Cold War operations before decommissioning in 1975. Unlike most decommissioned destroyers, which were scrapped or used as target practice, Laffey was preserved as a memorial. Since 1982, she has been moored at Patriots Point Naval Museum in South Carolina, where visitors can walk her decks and see the battle damage still visible in her hull. The aft 5-inch mount, Mount 53, was never repaired, remaining as a memorial to the 6 men who died there. Modern naval historians still debate how Laffey survived when statistics said she shouldn't have. Some point to the mathematical improbability of her survival as evidence of divine intervention. Others cite the cumulative effect of small advantages, superior training, innovative tactics, technological edge, that together created an unlikely but not impossible outcome. The truth probably lies somewhere between. War has always been the realm where preparation meets chaos, where human will confronts mechanical probability. What cannot be debated is the courage displayed that day. Japanese pilots who chose death over defeat, American sailors who stood their ground against overwhelming odds, young men on both sides who believed their cause worth dying for. The tragedy of war is that such courage is expended in mutual destruction rather than creation. The lesson of war is that such courage exists in ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. In the pre-dawn darkness of April 16, 1945, USS Laffey had been just another destroyer on radar picket duty. By noon, she had become legend. The ship that would not die. The destroyer that faced 22 kamikazes and survived. Her story would inspire generations of sailors, proving that with enough courage, training, and determination, even the impossible becomes possible. The final entry in Laffey's deck log for April 16, 1945, written by Quartermaster Footrides as the ship limped toward Karama Retto for emergency repairs, was characteristically understated. Sustained multiple enemy air attacks, ship damaged but operational, proceeding to base. Behind those clinical words lay 80 minutes of hell, 32 dead shipmates, and a story of survival that would echo through naval history. The war would end in 4 months. The kamikaze attacks would claim many more ships and lives before Japan's surrender. But never again would a single ship face such concentrated assault. Never again would the Japanese achieve such tactical coordination. And never again would the outcome be in doubt. Laffey had proven that American ships could take the worst the enemy could deliver and survive. In proving that, she had helped win the war. Today, the lessons of USS Laffey remain relevant. In an age of missile warfare and cyber attacks, when military theorists speak of single devastating strikes that can eliminate major combatants, Laffey stands as a reminder that wars are still won by people, not just technology. That training and preparation can overcome numerical disadvantage. That courage and determination can triumph over seemingly impossible odds. And that sometimes, against all probability and prediction, the ship that should not survive does exactly that. The mathematics of war are not always destiny. Sometimes they are merely the odds to be overcome.